Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at something a little different. Um, you guys sent us a true crime podcast episode, and we're going to kind of break it down, extract the key insights, and see if we can figure out, what makes this case tick.
Mm-hmm.
What makes it so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So get ready for a story of love and betrayal and a fight for justice.
The thing that really jumps out at me about this one is how the victim, Kathy McNorton, she really speaks from beyond the grave. Her efforts to document everything that was happening even before she was murdered, those become so crucial to the whole investigation.
Okay, so let's set the scene a little bit. It's
Sure.
February 15th, 2009, and we're in a quiet suburb outside of Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah.
Kathy McNorton is found murdered in her home. The scene is just absolutely horrific. Over
Okay.
30 stab wounds.
Yeah.
And who finds her body?
Her husband, Alec McNorton, a lawyer,
Okay.
and he claims that he was nowhere near the house that day.
Right. He's got this seemingly airtight alibi. At least that's what he thought.
Mm.
So this case has all the makings of a gripping thriller. We've got a whirlwind romance, a picture-perfect husband, a web of lies. Kathy and Alec met online, and they got married very, very quickly, within a year.
Wow.
She was successful, independent, had a great career at Delta Airlines. She was even training to become an investment advisor. But she was also coming out of a pretty difficult divorce and was looking for love.
Yeah.
And Alex just seemed like he checked all the boxes.
Right, but that's where the facade starts to crumble a little bit, because when you talk to Kathy's daughters, Heather and Michelle, they paint a very different picture of Alec.
Okay.
They describe him as very controlling, prone to arguments, and actually financially dependent on Kathy.
Really?
Yeah, so it's a very classic case of coercive control where the abuser really isolates the victim, manipulates them into questioning their own sanity.
That's awful.
Yeah.
And then just a few months into the marriage, Kathy calls Heather, her daughter,
Yeah.
completely distraught.
Oh.
She tells her that Alec physically abused her,
Oh, no.
leaving her bruised and just terrified.
So she didn't go to the police?
The daughters actually urged her to go to the police,
Mm.
but Kathy was too afraid at that point.
Right.
But this is where Kathy's thinking really kind of shines through.
Mm.
She knew that she needed proof. So she starts secretly documenting Alec's behavior,
Mm-hmm.
taking photographs of her injuries, and she's doing this with disposable cameras so he won't find them.
That's smart.
She's keeping very detailed notes about his lies, about his financial schemes, and she's even recording arguments where she references the abuse. These recordings become her voice when she's no longer here to speak for herself.
Wow. That's incredible foresight.
It really is. So the police, they focus their investigation on two main suspects. Obviously, Alec, the seemingly grieving husband, and then Gary, Kathy's ex-husband, who just happened to be in town the day of the murder.
Okay.
So what happened with Gary? Did they clear him?
Yeah, the police thoroughly investigated Gary's alibi, and they really couldn't find anything that suggested he was involved in any way. But very quickly, their attention shifted to Alec when they started looking into those cell phone records.
Right, because Alec claimed he was at his mother's house when he called home that afternoon. But those cell phone records actually place him miles away near the crime scene, not at his mother's house.
Exactly. And that's not the only hole in his story. The police also noted that there was a complete lack of blood on Alec, despite his claims of, trying to revive Kathy.
Right.
And given the extreme brutality of this attack and just the massive amount of blood at the scene, his story just wasn't making sense.
Right, and they have these really damning photos of Kathy's injuries, right?
Right.
But the prosecution hits a wall. They can't prove who took those photos.
Ah.
And without that link, the photos are inadmissible in court. They show them to everybody close to Kathy, but no one seemed to recognize the background or the person who took the pictures.
Wow, that's a tough spot to be in.
It really is.
So what'd they do?
So this is where investigator Jason Fentner really his dedication shines through. He decides, you know what, let's try one more time. And they reach out to Delta Airlines, Kathy's employer. And that's how they find Sandra Harmon.
Sandra Harmon.
Yeah, she's a counselor who had worked with some of the Delta employees.
Oh, wow, what a breakthrough.
Talk about a breakthrough.
Yeah.
So what did she know?
Sandra reveals that Kathy confided in her about the abuse and specifically asked her to take those pictures as evidence.
Wow.
She remembered how distraught Kathy was, just desperate to document what was happening.
So with those photos now authenticated, the case against Alec is suddenly a whole lot stronger. The prosecution has concrete proof to back up Kathy's claims of abuse, which completely contradicts Alec's insistence that their marriage was loving and peaceful.
Right.
But they didn't stop there. They decided to dig a little deeper into Alec's past.
Oh, interesting. What'd they find?
Well, what they uncovered is a chilling pattern of behavior going back decades.
Oh,
So they tracked down 3 of Alec's ex-wives, and each one of them agrees to testify.
wow.
And their stories paint a really horrific picture of Alec as a man with a long history of violence and abuse.
Oh my gosh. That's terrible.
His first wife, Linda, described how Alec would beat her with his fist and even a Coke bottle,
Yeah,
breaking her nose, fracturing her jaw. And this was simply because she refused to have sex with him.
that's awful.
And it gets worse. His second wife, also named Linda, recounted how Alec, in a fit of rage, threw her into a glass-topped dining table, shattering it, all because she stood up to him.
It's just unbelievable.
And then his third wife, Susan, shared a truly terrifying story of Alec threatening to kill both her and their daughter, Alexis, with a shotgun after they had an argument.
Oh my goodness.
And what's even more impactful is that Alec's own daughter, Alexis, backed up Susan's account.
Wow.
She even called 911 during that incident, terrified that her father was actually going to follow through with his threats.
That's scary.
So you have these 3 women, all from different periods of Alec's life, describing very similar experiences of violence and control.
Right.
So how does Alec respond to all of this?
I mean, he denies it all, right?
Of course he denies everything. Claims his ex-wives are all lying or exaggerating or just misremembering events. It seems like a classic abuser tactic, just blaming the victim and trying to discredit their stories.
Exactly. But, his arrogance and this complete lack of remorse, it really just hurt his credibility. The trial itself actually became quite a spectacle.
Really?
Yeah, Alec, convinced of his own intelligence, and driven by his ego, decided to represent himself in court.
Wait, he represented himself?
He did.
Even though he's a lawyer himself?
Yeah, he is a lawyer.
Wow.
His lawyer, Michael Cam, even warned him against it. Told him that he was too arrogant, too unlikable, and that he would likely sabotage himself on the stand.
Wow.
But Alec just completely ignored this advice, believing he could outsmart the prosecution and manipulate the jury.
So he took the stand himself.
He did. He took the stand proclaiming his innocence, his love for Kathy.
And how did that go for him?
Well, his testimony was riddled with inconsistencies, contradictions. He even tried to claim that Kathy's injuries were actually inflicted by her ex-husband, Gary. Oh, come on.
Despite the fact that there was zero evidence to support that.
Oh, wow.
So the prosecution had a field day with that.
Yeah.
They meticulously dismantled his alibi using those cell phone records, the witness testimonies, and those crucial photos taken by Sandra Harmon. And they presented Alec as a controlling and abusive husband who ultimately resorted to murder to silence his wife.
So the jury had to decide. Was he a loving husband who was falsely accused? Or was he a master manipulator hiding a very dark and violent nature?
Right. It all came down to who they believed.
Yeah.
Well, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury came back with a verdict. Guilty. They found Alec guilty of malice murder.
Wow.
The courtroom just erupted. Gasps, sobs. Kathy's daughters, Heather and Michelle, they embraced. Just tears streaming down their faces. It's just palpable, the sense of relief,
Right.
They finally had justice for their mother.
It's hard to even imagine what they must have been going through waiting for that verdict.
Absolutely. And Alec, he was stunned, all of that arrogance that we talked about.
Yeah. It just vanished. It was replaced by this disbelief, anger. He still maintained his innocence, saying that he was railroaded, that the real killer was still out there, but, the evidence against him was just overwhelming.
Yeah.
You have the photos, you have the cell phone records, those chilling testimonies from his ex-wives. It all pointed to Alec as a violent and controlling man who was capable of taking a life.
So what was his sentence?
The judge sentenced Alec to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Wow.
As he was led away in handcuffs, he just glared at the courtroom. His face was just twisted with this rage and defiance.
It's a chilling reminder that domestic violence can escalate to these really horrific levels.
It really is. And, this case just highlights how important it is to believe victims when they come forward, to recognize the signs of abuse, and to take action to prevent these tragedies from happening. We can't just sit back and wait for something terrible to happen. We have to be proactive.
It also makes you think about the courage that it takes for victims to speak out. Kathy, she reached out for help. She documented the abuse. She confided in people she trusted.
Right.
But it tragically wasn't enough to save her life.
And that's one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this whole case. Kathy's daughters actually blame themselves for not doing more to protect their mother.
Oh, wow.
They said they wish they had convinced her to leave Alex sooner or to go to the police immediately.
I can only imagine that weight of guilt.
I know, and their guilt is understandable, but it's misplaced. The responsibility for Kathy's death rests solely with Alec, her abuser.
Right.
Victims of domestic violence are often subjected to immense pressure and manipulation, which makes it incredibly difficult for them to leave or even seek help.
It is not their fault.
It's never the victim's fault. This case also really underscores the power of documentation, you know?
Right.
Kathy's decision to secretly photograph her injuries, to record those conversations, to keep such detailed notes, I mean, it proved to be absolutely crucial in securing Alec's conviction.
It's really amazing.
It is. Her meticulous documentation became this incredibly powerful tool for the prosecution. She understood that Alec's charm and charisma could easily sway people, so she meticulously built this case against him, knowing that one day her evidence might be the key to exposing the truth.
And in a way, it allowed her to speak even after she was gone.
Exactly. Her foresight and her bravery ensured that even in death, her voice was heard, her story was told.
So we have this incredibly tragic loss, but in the end, we also see that justice was served.
Yes. But it's a bittersweet victory. Alec is behind bars, but nothing can bring Kathy back or erase the pain that her family has endured.
It's a stark reminder that, even seemingly perfect relationships can hide very dark secrets.
They can, and it reminds us to be vigilant, to look beyond the surface, and to offer support to anyone who might be trapped in a dangerous situation.
Yeah, we can't just assume that everything's fine.
We can't. So I'm curious, what are your biggest takeaways from this deep dive so far? What resonates with you the most?
What really gets to me? It's just realizing how Kathy's documentation, all that secret recording and photographing that really became her weapon in the end. It says so much about her strength and her refusal to be silenced. Even when she was facing unimaginable fear, she still found a way to fight back.
It really is remarkable. Just makes you think, right, about all the hidden struggles that people are dealing with every day. We so often only see the surface, the carefully crafted image that people present to the world. But underneath that, there can be so much pain, so much fear.
Yeah, and it raises the question, doesn't it? How can we, all of us, be more aware, more attuned to the subtle signs that someone might be struggling? Because it's so easy to just dismiss those red flags, to tell ourselves that it's none of our business. But sometimes even just a simple act of kindness, just being willing to listen without judgment, that can make all the difference. I think that's so true. And it's important to remember that. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, you're not alone.
Right?
There are resources available, people who genuinely want to help.
Reaching out is so important. It's that first step, that crucial first step towards safety and healing. And it's so important to remember Kathy's story. Believe victims when they come forward. Their voices deserve to be heard.
This deep dive has been just a powerful reminder that justice can prevail even in the darkest of circumstances.
It can.
But it's also a call to action for all of us to be more aware, more compassionate, and more willing to step up and help those who need it.
Absolutely. And if this case has kind of sparked your interest in the complexities of domestic violence or even just the criminal justice system, I really encourage you to explore it more. There's so many resources out there, books, articles, documentaries, all just waiting to be discovered.
This has been just one story, but it really does speak to these larger issues that we need to pay attention to. Be aware, be informed, and above all, be kind. You never know what battles someone might be fighting behind closed doors. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.